Hello, History of St. Louis. Welcome to unit number 5, where we take a look at St. Louis right around this time period of the 1904 World's Fair. But before we can talk about the World's Fair, we got to talk about the place where the World's Fair was held, which is Forest Park. And so this lesson is going to take you on a tour of Forest Park. I've basically broken down Forest Park into 3 categories. Category 1 is going to be some of the famous waterways. Category 2 is going to be some of the athletic areas. And then Category 3 is going to be cultural. By cultural, we mean entertainment, we mean artistic, or we mean educational. So those are the 3 things that sort of fit into what we talk about culturally. There is a worksheet that students should have that can go along with this presentation and complete as we move through in order to sort of whittle down the facts of it. So here is just a general view of Forest Park. You'll see here the northern boundary is Lindell Boulevard. Then you have Kings Highway here to the east. Here's the Highway 40 Kings Highway interchange. A lot of people think Highway 40 is the actual boundary, but it isn't. It's actually Oakland Avenue. So technically Highway 40 is in Forest Park. Oakland Avenue, which is just south of Highway 40, is the actual breakdown for the park. And then finally, you have Skinker Boulevard here to the west. Skinker Boulevard also is the unofficial demarcation between the city and the county. So Forest Park is in the city, and then when you cross the street into the county, you cross Skinker Boulevard, you basically are walking into St. Louis County. St. Louis City does extend for a little bit, but not by very much. A little bit about the Forest Park history. It was opened in June of 1876, so just about 10 years after the Civil War. The city purchased land for the price of about $850,000, with another $1 million or so dedicated to the maintenance and improvement of the land. The largest parcels of land belonged to 2 gentlemen, Thomas Skinker and William Forsyth, and so you're going to want to jot those 2 names down. Charles Choteau and Julia Moffett were some other big landowners. There were about 14 total landowners that donated Forest Park to be created. But out of those 14, the 2 largest ones by far were Thomas Skinker and William Forsyth. The original plan, when they were thinking about creating Forest Park or a new park in the central part of the city, was to have it 3,000 acres. And that was rejected by voters as just being way too expensive and actually way too big. And how does that compare with what we have today? Today we have 1,371 acres. So imagine Forest Park being more than double its actual size today, and you can see just how big that initial plan was. So because of cost and just the amount of property, they scaled it down. And it's still the largest park in the St. Louis area by far. Maximilian Kern and Julius Pitzman will design the park. And basically, they design it off of Central Park in New York. Central Park in New York is sort of the first urban park. They created Forest Park where it is located because they wanted it away from the city so that you wouldn't have to deal with the stench and the sickness and the dirt of the city. And it was far enough away where you could feel like you were out in the country. And in fact, they never thought that St. Louis would grow past Forest Park, that it was really out in the outskirts back in the day, and they never thought that St. Louis would grow west of Forest Park. And as you well know, We are very much west of Forest Park today. We already went over the boundaries. We already went over the fact that it was modeled after Central Park in New York. This is a little bit about what the early park used to look like, and you can see it was called Forest Park because it was primarily forest. The only section that is today forest is the little section right in here, known as Kennedy Forest, the southwest corner. But basically, and we'll talk about why, but basically the park has been deforested for the most part. And so here's, again, our look at Forest Park. We're going to break things down into three categories. The first category is going to be the water features. So we're going to take a look at some of the water spots. Basically, on the worksheet, there are boxes that you're going to fill in the name of these water features and then some of the information that we highlight. The first feature is actually a water feature that is no longer in Forest Park. And you can see in this map, this is Forest Park right in here, and you'll notice that back in the day there used to be a river that ran through Forest Park. Now there are still remnants of that river today that make up some of the waterways of Forest Park, but the actual river that ran through Forest Park has been basically taken out, and that river is called the River des Peres. They basically buried it. Initially, they buried it underground for the 1904 World's Fair because it was disgusting. It was basically an open sewer that St. Louis was using for all sorts of trash and personal pollutants, if you know what I mean. And it just was a disgusting thing, and so they didn't want this disgusting water feature in the middle of their beautiful fair, so they buried it with wooden sewers. After the fair, they bring it back up above ground, and St. Louis goes back to using it as the open sewer that they were, and things had gotten so bad health-wise and smell-wise and disgustingness-wise that they decide to build a permanent concrete sewer system in the 1930s. And so today that water feature does exist with some of the little riverscapes and whatnot. And you can kind of see where it was, but it has been buried underground. And this is what it looked like back in the day above ground. You can see here where it flooded, and it flooded in some of the nice communities really across the street from Forest Park, and that really started impacting housing. And when you have disgusting rivers impacting housing, that kind of forced the city to deal with things. So here is what the size of those concrete sewer tubes look like when they created them. Those sewer tubes are still in Forest Park today. There are a couple access points where you can actually go into the sewer system. It's really not sewers as we think of it today. It's more like storm runoff today. Here you can see the History Museum, and you can see basically where they started the system of the sewer line. This is Lindell Boulevard right here. Here's the History Museum. And then you can see that basically the sewer system goes underground and then follows right along here, which is basically where the river went. Right around here is the Barnes Jewish Hospital down in this section, right over in this area here. The next big water feature is the Grand Basin. That's the name of the water feature. Just above the Grand Basin is Art Hill, but for right now, we're going to be talking about the Grand Basin. The Grand Basin was built for the 1904 World's Fair. It was the centerpiece of the 1904 World's Fair. So this was the center of the fair, and basically the fairground spiraled around this scenic panorama. After the World's Fair, they left it alone. They left it in the park, but over the years it had decayed and become really decrepit. And so in 2003, as part of a restoration plan for all of Forest Park, the Grand Basin was redone and made to look like it did back in the 1904 World's Fair. They re-added the water fountains, which are lit up at night. And so they really made it nice. They took the walkways around the Grand Basin and made them concrete. They used to be rock, and they were really getting to become decrepit. Um, and so they really redid this. And then the other thing that made it very accessible to citizens is they took away the two golf holes that were around it. There used to be a par five that went around here, and then there was a par three that went over this side of uh, the Grand Basin. But when they decided to redo it, they wanted it to be more of a location where people could walk around and enjoy it rather than just the golfers. And so they moved the golf holes to another part of the course and opened this up to pedestrians. As you well know, Art Hill is known for sledding, and the Grand Basin is down at the bottom, so you do have to worry. Here's a picture of the top of Art Hill looking down Art Hill toward the Grand Basin, and so it's a nice downhill jaunt to the Grand Basin. This is what Art Hill looked like back in the day. So here I am standing at the top of Art Hill. Here is the top of Art Hill where the picture was, so you can see how things have changed. So you can see here that Art Hill was dramatically changed for the 1904 World's Fair, and we'll find out later on why they just couldn't keep all this for the fair post-fair. So here's what most St. Louisans think of when they think of Art Hill, and that's the sledding. Here you can see that back in the day, they used to let people walk on the Grand Basin when it was frozen over. They pretty much stopped that today, and now they line it with hay bales, as you can see right here, in order to stop people from sledding into the Grand Basin and potentially breaking through. And so they've eliminated that. This is Art Hill for the speech given by Charles Lindbergh when he returned from his famous flight. Over 100,000 people lined up on Art Hill to hear him speak. And they're all looking up at him flying over the crowd in his airplane. Number 3 water feature is the Post-Dispatch Lake, which was purchased by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in 1894. Before that, it was a lake that was primarily known for being used for boating and swimming and ice skating. But then St. Louis started trashing it, and when the paper bought it, they cleaned it up, and then sometime later started doing a boathouse, and that boathouse has been there ever since. Today, you can rent kayaks or paddle boats. In 2003, they updated the boathouse area and opened up a restaurant and bar area where they have nighttime entertainment, as well as outdoor seating during this whole COVID thing. So a great place to be. And so Post-Dispatch Lake does connect with the Grand Basin so that you can boat from here, the boathouse, all the way to the Grand Basin and then back. And that usually takes up about an hour's worth of time when you go to rent the paddle boats. And then you have a couple other lakes. You got Round Lake here. Round Lake is famous really for having one of the earliest water fountains in the St. Louis area. This water fountain dates back to the early 1900s. And so a nice little area. I believe it is also one of 3 lakes that are stocked with fish. And then finally, you have the Cascades, otherwise known as Fleagle Falls. This area was part of the Japanese section of the 1904 World's Fair. And then St. Louisans were reminiscent of the waterfall for the 1904 World's Fair going down Art Hill. And so in 1937, they built this little mini waterfall that is today right across the area from where the pro club is for the golf course. And this waterfall is a site for senior photos, prom photos, wedding photos, you name it. When you go there in the summer, fall, and early spring, it's just people taking pictures right and left. And so it's known as Flegel Falls because of the Flegel family that donated it to overhaul it and bring it back to existence in Forest Park. So now we move on to our second category, which is athletic areas. Post 1904 World's Fair, when they cut down most of the trees, they had to find something to put into Forest Park. And because of a gentleman named Dwight Davis, which we will talk about in just a little bit, athletics were added to Forest Park. It used to be primarily just a forest, and so you would walk through it. Well, after the World's Fair, they had to come up with other things to do, and that's when they bring in athletics. The Norman Propstein Golf Course is the major golf course in the park. It basically takes up the whole northwestern section of the park. It was known as the Dwight Eisenhower Golf Course, and then it was nicknamed the Forest Park Golf Course. And then in 2003, the Propstein family donated a bunch of money to have the course redone, and so they did. In 1913 is when it started. Today it is 3 9-hole courses, and so when you play 18, you get to pick which 2 of the 3 you would like to play. The Propstein family did donate about $2 million to have the course redone in 2003, including moving those 2 holes near the Grand Basin away from the Grand Basin. The other major golf course in the Forest Park area is known as the Highlands Golf Course. This was known as the AAA Golf Course because when it first opened, it opened up as a private club, which did discriminate against African Americans and women. Later on, St. Louis passed a law that said you could not have any restrictive clubs in the city of St. Louis, and so this forced the AAA golf course to open up publicly. Unlike the Norman Propstein Golf Course, this is just 9 holes, and they tend to be smaller holes, so it's a great place for first-time golfers to learn to play. And so it is now known as the Highlands Golf Course, but is the second of 2 golf courses in Forest Park. Probably the most famous athletic area was brought to us by the Steinberg family. In 1955, the Steinbergs went to New York on a vacation and went downtown into the Rockefeller Center area and skated at Rockefeller Center and said, you know what, St. Louis should have an outdoor rink as well. And so they came home and donated money, and 2 years later, in 1957, Steinberg Skating Rink was open and has become a tradition in St. Louis ever since. Its schedule is from November 1st to March 1st. It is open. Obviously, there are some hotter days where they have to shut things down. There is a restaurant there for snacks. They have some open fire pits to keep warm. In the summertime, they do renovate it into some sand volleyball courts. And so this is probably the most famous athletic area in Forest Park. The Dwight Davis Tennis Center was the original location for the tennis courts when they were brought into the park by this gentleman right here, Dwight Davis. Dwight Davis was park director from 1910 to 1930 and was really responsible for bringing in athletics. One of the first things that he did, he was an avid tennis player himself, and so he brought in grass tennis courts like you see in Wimbledon today. Those grass tennis courts were eventually converted over to concrete courts like we have today. And as you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 outdoor courts. And then you have the tennis stadium where they will hold exhibition matches with professional players. The St. Louis Aces play there, which is the St. Louis professional team. And if you know anything about tennis, you know that there is a competition among countries called the Davis Cup, and that is named after this guy. So he was obviously very big in the tennis community. And those tennis courts are open to the general public, but the stadium is obviously not open to the public. There are also some racquetball courts and handball courts, but that's at the visitor center, which we'll see in just a little bit. Then you have the Boeing Fields. The Boeing Fields can be seen. Those are the soccer and baseball and softball fields right along Highway 40. It's known as the Boeing Fields because Boeing donated a whole bunch of money to have them redone. But it's also connected to air flight. As you can see here today, there is this hangar-looking building that you can see from Highway 40. And it's, as you can see, the mounted police. Forest Park was one of 3 parks that had police on mounted horseback so that they could get to places easier than trying to drive cars and have to get out and then walk or run. So St. Louis does have a mounted police patrol there, and this is their building. But before it was the mounted patrol, this area of Forest Park was an airfield where they would run airmail between here and Chicago. And so this was the airplane hangar where the airfield was located. Between 1920 and 21, when it was an airmail service, a young pilot by the name of, you guessed it, Charles Lindbergh worked here in St. Louis to fly mail between St. Louis and Chicago. And then later he will go on to fly across the Atlantic. And so this was the airfield that he worked in and out of. Obviously, there are no remnants of that airfield other than the hangar building today. And now finally we get to the cultural areas. These are, remember, artistic, educational, or educational. And so obviously the major cultural center in Forest Park, and the one that takes up the largest amount of space in Forest Park, is the zoo. The zoo will open just after the 1904 World's Fair in 1910 with animals left over. It is one of the few things in the St. Louis area that is paid for with both taxpayer money from the city and county. It is one of the free zoos in the United States, and is usually ranked in the top 3. It's usually between us, San Diego, and the Bronx Zoo in New York. If you've ever been to the San Diego Zoo, it's a lot like Six Flags. It's that kind of entertainment, whereas the Bronx Zoo and St. Louis Zoo is a little bit more closely related. So we have one of the top zoos in the United States. There is talk of potentially making an admission fee, especially with COVID right now, and they're having to limit things. There is some fear that they're going to have to start doing some admissions to keep up with the costs. And so we'll learn a little bit more about the zoo later on. Number 2 is the Art Museum. This is one of the few buildings that was built for the 1904 World's Fair that was to be made out of a permanent building material. As you can see, it's made out of stone. That was so that it would be fireproof for all of the priceless works of art that were coming to St. Louis from around the world. It is Beaux Art, and you can see how you spell Beaux Art. Beaux Art is basically, it's a combination of Greek and Roman and other classical styles. You can see it's obviously not Greek Revival because it doesn't have the triangular front, but it does have the Greek columns to it. It also has some Roman features to it, like the arched window, and so that is Beaux Art. In 2015, they opened up this expansion area, which is made out of glass primarily so that they could use as much natural light as possible. And so it is probably the second or third most visited place in Forest Park today. It has art from almost every major historical time period and almost every famous artist in the world of art. So I highly suggest it. It is free as well to get in, but they do have some traveling exhibits that do cost money if you would like to go there. Number three is the Jewel Box. It's one of the few things in Forest Park that doesn't have to do with the World's Fair. The Jewel Box was built in 1936 as part of the Great Depression, and it was a way to give men jobs with the WPA. And so it is a greenhouse. It is Art Deco in style. You can see it because it's very geometric and very layered. And by layered, I mean level, then a down level, and then a down level. So it's very geometric in shape. It also is, it has one of the most photographed outside areas with the lily ponds and whatnot. Not only is it a greenhouse, but they do host some events, including personal weddings there as well. Just a nice little area in Forest Park. You have the History Museum, which was one of two buildings built after the World's Fair with money left over. It was constructed in 1913. It originally was the Jefferson Memorial, as you can see here, and if you walk inside of this area, you will see a seated statue of Thomas Jefferson. We'll talk about why Thomas Jefferson was honored this way a little bit later on. And then in the 1920s, the Missouri History Museum opened up, or the Missouri Historical Society moved in and turned this into a history museum. And so it does have some permanent exhibits connected with the World's Fair in Charles Lindbergh. They also have some traveling exhibits that do cost money, but the History Museum is free, as well as the Jewel Box does cost like $2 or $4 to get in. The planetarium, not the Science Center, but the planetarium is another key feature of Forest Park. This opened in 1963 and was dedicated to planetary sciences, so astronomy and planetary sciences. Its main feature is at the center of this building is this star theater, where they have this star machine, and it does astronomy shows of all kinds for different levels of visitors, all the way from little kids to adults. At nighttime, as you can see, it is very colorfully lit up. The shape of it is called an hyperboloid. And it also is known during the holiday season for having a bow wrapped around it. And that is because in 1972, a WashU fraternity did a prank and snuck up onto the planetarium Christmas Eve and wrapped a bow around it so that when St. Louis woke up the next day on Christmas morning, there would be a bow wrapped around the planetarium. And it got such positive feedback from the community that they had to admit that they didn't do it. And then a fraternity came out and said, we did it. And it's become a tradition ever since. You do know that there is a crosswalk that goes over Highway 40 and connects the planetarium with the Science Center that's on the other side of Highway 40. So this is the planetarium. The Municipal Theater, otherwise known as the Muni, opened up in 1919 after a celebration of Shakespeare that was so well attended that they decided that they were going to have to open up a permanent theater in the park. It is the largest outdoor theater today. It holds about 12,000 people. And because it is in Forest Park, to make sure that anybody can go to its shows, they do give away about 1,400 free tickets every performance. So you could legitimately go see every show at the Muni for free as long as you got one of those 1,400 tickets. The Muni season usually goes from June to August. They usually do 7 weeks of shows, with each show going 1 week. It has become a St. Louis tradition They do have some fans here, as you can see, to try to keep things a little bit more comfortable. They just did a major renovation to the sound stage, and the stage as the main stage at the Muni. But with COVID, they have had to change their schedules for the 2020 season. The World's Fair Pavilion is the other building that was built after the World's Fair was over with money left over from the fair. This one was built in 1910. It was supposed to be a refreshment stand, so where you could buy food in the park, but then it was shut down for a little bit, and then it has been reconfigured as a party space. So you can have outdoor weddings, you can have outdoor parties there. They have totally redone the hill that you see here. This is called Government Hill. And from where I am standing when I took this picture, right behind me would be Post-Dispatch Lake. So this whole area is so if you are standing up here at the World's Fair Pavilion looking down this hill, you would be looking at Post-Dispatch Lake. And so this water fountain right here has been newly constructed. The older one had just become real decrepit looking and dirty, and so they redid it here. And the World's Fair Pavilion got touched up as well, so that it could be rented out for all sorts of parties and exhibitions. And then finally, you have the Visitor Center. The Visitor Center was originally built as a streetcar drop-off. And so this is where the streetcars would drop off in 1893, so that this would be the entrance to Forest Park with the streetcars. Then once streetcars stopped being used, they converted this over to a golf pro club, the golf clubhouse. But then in 2003, when they redid the golf course, they built a pro club or a clubhouse just for them. And so then they converted this over to a visitor center. So it has a banquet hall, it has a snack shop, and it has some locker facilities so that if you want to use the handball or racquetball courts, you can. They also do bike tours and walking tours that start and end here as well. The clock tower is the famous part of it, and it still does keep accurate time today. So that's a little bit about Forest Park. We are going to get into the World's Fair, and here you can see how the World's Fair fit into Forest Park, and that we're going to find out that the western section of the park was used for the fair, and the eastern section of the park was left park so that St. Louisans could still utilize some of the park for their own personal uses and not have to go into the World's Fair. So that's a little bit, that's headlining what we're going to talk about. So I hope you enjoyed this look at Forest Park. If you've not visited there, get out there. What's taking you so long? And we hope to see you out there in the future. Have a great day.